That and hopefully you got some NVIDIA, but the whole
I got
market
both of them.
actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not enough to brag about, but yeah, I got a toe in there. Welcome to the Opposites Unite podcast,
where we discuss real estate and lifestyle topics,
break barriers,
build connections,
and find common ground.
Let's unite.
Okay, so today on the podcast show, we have my good friend, Chris Johnson, estate planning and probate planning attorney. Probate attorney, right? Not probate planning.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, probate's usually the unplanned stuff.
Got it. Okay, so that makes sense, right? So I love talking to you about this kind of stuff. I mean, it gets really complicated, and sometimes it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for a lot of people to deal with this stuff, but it's your thing. So today I get to talk to you about it and ask you questions about how it works. How are you seeing the things nowadays working in the probate and estate planning?
It's always been about the same. Like I think our estate planning attorney's message is do your planning. It just makes things so much easier. But the numbers are about the same as when I started 30 years ago, that 70% of us have not done anything, like not even a will, or at least when we die, it's 70%. And that number, as far as I can see, is the same. So I just try to reach people, but at least the ones who are open to planning and making things a lot easier. And then on the probate side, the unplanned side, we're just around to clean up the mess if we need to after someone's passed away.
So estate planning is the planning part, right? And then probate is what you're left with if you didn't plan, or how it gets executed once.
Pretty much it. Like in California, if you have a will and some real estate, it's probably also going to go to probate. So maybe you've done some planning, but if you're in that situation, I think most attorneys would recommend doing a trust and doing the best to minimize staying out of court and keeping the costs down as much as possible. But the truth is most people don't even have the will, so they wind up with no plan and scramble for who's going to be in charge and who gets to file and who's going to get paid for doing this and kind of all of that stuff because there is no plan.
So the plan is to plan early, right? I mean, that's the idea, is to get as much as you can upfront done while you're healthy, while everybody's happy.
Exactly.
Otherwise, if you don't plan, then it's a scramble, and probably the person that could have made the plan is gone. So then they're left to kind of sort through what's left.
Yeah, or if maybe they're almost gone, like that's never a great time to do it. We certainly have done it, but ideally, you do it, like you said, when someone's healthy and everybody's happy and they've had time to think about what they want and who's going to be in charge and maybe had time to kind of prepare the family about it. And the other is, like, if it's done on someone's deathbed, there's always a good chance that someone's not going to like it.
Yeah.
And, the medical records aren't going to be very kind as far as whether that person was in a good state or not to be doing that.
I do remember that we had a transaction that you had referred to me, right, where the dad he wasn't able to talk anymore, right? He had gone through some medical events and he wasn't able to talk. So there had to be 3 doctors that had to testify to him not being able to be responsible, right? So that gets complicated. And then all of a sudden it's hope that he had done all the planning that he had done right.
Yeah. Because if you have done the planning, well, then, like the documents will say, is it maybe 1 to 3 doctors say you're not able to handle things anymore, and so it goes on to the person you've chosen to take care of things.
Yeah.
And that, hopefully all that goes pretty smoothly, because if that's not in place, well, then you've got to go to court and get the conservatorship, which is the same thing. We all know Britney Spears' conservatorship, but it's the same process for
that was a mess, man.
Yes.
Right? I mean, but yeah, you don't want to wind up there. And long story short, you want to have everything probably about as drawn up as possible. So what are some common mistakes that you would see people make, like whenever they do get to set it up, and then they don't do something that that winds up being that spills like once they're gone, then they're like, ooh, just a simple little thing would have
Well,
resolved
probably
it.
the simplest is just even if you've done a trust already, the magic of the trust happens when assets are inside the trust. And that's what keeps them out of probate and the court process. And so when we say inside the trust or trust funding or whatever that is, or whatever terms you hear, the main thing is things like real estate or your investment accounts or your savings or CDs, for the most part, after consulting with the attorney, but for the most part, those things should be titled in the trust. So it'd be like John and Jane Smith, trustees of the Smith Family Trust.
So people actually create a trust,
Yeah.
and then their property is in, like you said, John and Jane, their personal name, right? They don't transfer it into the name of the trust, so it stays outside the trust. And then if they're gone, that property still has to go through probate.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, that's a big mistake, right?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest one we see is people just, they do the trust and I think, well, I have a trust, everything's good now. And then they buy a new piece of property or maybe they just even do the trust online and don't realize they need to move assets in the trust. And a lot of times something we attorneys do is make a list of the assets that should be in the trust.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a backup measure basically we can get a court order after death and it saves the full probate, but it's still, probably a $7,000 to $10,000 exercise. And people think, well, I saw the list at the back of the trust, so I know my property's in the trust, and that's not true.
You
It's
still
got to
have, you
be,
still have to go to probate to kind of clarify it.
yeah. So what you really want is just every so often check the titles on your properties.
You
Are
want
they
that serial number on the Rolex in there, and you want
Yes.
like as much detail as you can put in there.
much as that? And then like the bank account, it should say again the Smith Family Trust and there are some exceptions I tell people because the probate requirements are for if there's less than $184,500 in assets just in your name at death, then you can use what's called a small estate affidavit procedure.
Okay.
So like the checking account that you probably already have all your bill paying and things attached to and incoming payments and things that you can leave out of the trust because if it's under 184,000, it's not going to go through probate. But your CDs or your Tesla stock that did very well today, that kind of thing. If it's higher than that, that's kind of where the mistakes are.
Did it do well today?
It did.
Yeah.
And hopefully you got some Nvidia, but the whole
I got
market
both of them.
actually.
Yeah, not enough to brag about, but yeah, I got a toe in there. I wish it was a whole foot, even my whole leg, right? Especially today. I didn't get a chance to look at stocks today, but so that's interesting that people make that mistake, but it does make sense because all right, when what I see a lot of people do is that they have to refinance, and then they'll take the property out of the trust, right, and then they won't put it back in
Yeah.
because of whatever
Yeah, and they're not aware of all the papers they're signing, and a lot of times the bank will say, we'll put it back in, and they may not, though. And so I just, one of the things that people ask, well, how often do I have to update my trust? And the answer is probably not that often. Rarely are there changes in the law that require it.
right.
There've been a few over my career, but
What are good events? I'm thinking
marriage, birth of kids. Probably the main things for updating are if changing who the successor trustees are, like the people who are going to be in charge after you're gone. Like, maybe you name your parents when the kids are young, but now your parents are 90 and maybe not the best trustees. Well, you can put someone else in there. Or maybe you've got beneficiaries that you don't want anymore, like a charitable donation that you want to move to a different charity. But then at the same time, that's also a great time where we want to look at all the assets and see, are they actually in the trust or
Right.
not?
Or have you acquired or transferred or replaced or
Yeah.
bought anything new?
Yeah, because you probably in that time you bought new property or changed investment accounts or even, checking the beneficiaries on things. Like if you got married, you might still have your brother on the life insurance at work, that kind of thing.
Right. That's, I don't know. I always wanted to ask you about how life insurance gets in that, because there's a complication to doing that I don't know that we have the time to do that. But anyways.
Yeah, well, it's a good way to fight. Oh, and is there a community property interest? And there's certainly been a lot of lawsuits, but yeah, the bottom line is it would save a lot of time and money to just make sure the beneficiaries are right on those things, or your 401k.
Well, you know what? There's a lot of like digital assets. That's what we were talking about before we started, right? And people, like, how do you deed that stuff in there? Can you change those accounts into trusts? Like,
some of them allow it. And so if you can, like your online accounts, it would be good to retitle those in the trust. The things that don't get retitled are retirement accounts or annuities. That might be a tax problem to do that. But then you can just kind of take care of it by naming the right beneficiaries. Or some cases, like if your kids are really young, you might just have the trust be the beneficiary of that asset, and you get the same effect. It's still going to wind up in the trust and be held, say, for the benefit of your kids after
oh,
you're
so you
gone.
don't actually assign it to go to the beneficiary. You leave it to stay in the trust.
Yeah, especially like I'd say it kind of depends, but if the beneficiary for whatever reason shouldn't just get it, outside of the trust or get it with no strings attached, then you can leave it to the trust
Well,
instead.
you always hear like I don't know if they want to call it a complication, but like a really specific way of like you leave it so that it stays in the trust, then the trust distributes it over time, or it's a way of kind of keeping like somebody that isn't responsible enough to take it directly. Then in that time frame, the attorney can manage the estate, right? Or how does that work?
Yeah, or you name a trustee to do that. So it could be, whoever the trustee is, but maybe it's the friend or a sibling or
Somebody
maybe
that's
it's a
probably
professional.
more responsible and
Yeah.
on top of things, right?
Yeah, I always say think about, is the person organized and do they keep good records, and do they actually answer calls from the beneficiaries so that, everyone feels good about what's going on, and they can provide the records to show what they've been spending money on and what the trust funds are doing and that kind of thing. That kind of person. And they're, not all that rare, but rare enough that, out of 3 or 4 kids, there's probably 1 or 2 that are make good ones and a couple that are not going to be good trustees.
I feel like in family there's a dynamic, right? There's always the one kid, and you always look at the younger kids. We were talking about this yesterday. I was talking about this yesterday with a friend, where he has 2 kids, and he's like, the younger kid seems like he's rougher than the older kid, right? Like the older kid's not as rough as the younger one. I go, of course, the other one's more mentally developed, and the younger one's trying to fight with him, so he can't beat him mentally. So he's gonna be like, he's gonna go roughhouse,
Yeah.
I don't know, just dynamics that you deal with in families and stuff. And then as we grow up, there's some degree of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and sometimes people, like the way they dealt with their brother or sister when they were 5 may not have changed all that much. When they're 55 and you still got the same resentments or...
That's what I was touching on, was resentments, man, because those things carry into a lot of what you deal with. Because from what I've seen, and I've been, just even when I'm like selling a property and stuff, and there's like multiple beneficiaries, there's an interesting dynamic where sometimes they do get along really well, but other times they don't. And it's just like, people are just like, here, give me the money. Yeah, I just want the money. And then other times they're like, no, like, let's see what we can do about making sure we take care of everybody. But it's totally different every time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes, like you said, sometimes they'll be considerate of the other beneficiaries and other times no. or sometimes they just want to make them suffer somehow, and that's not a good trustee. I'll say that's the one who gets sued and causes a lot more issues and time and attorney money
Well, yeah, because every time you have to jump in and settle one of these things is an expense, right? I mean, to them,
yeah.
and the estate. So, I mean, the easier they can make it, the easier you can make it, and it's just I've just seen a lot of that, man. A lot of whenever that comes up, but like the teeth come out, and
And the way to whatever issues they had with the siblings, they want to somehow solve them, or I don't know, make the other person pay somehow in this, and it's just not a good arena for it because they're not going to be satisfied. And even if you sue somebody in court, you're probably not going to get the result you want or the vindication you want, and it's going to cost a lot of money to get.
Was there ever like a case or like a person that came to you and wanted you to structure things in a way where you were like, wow, this guy really thought it through in a way that you were like thought was better than other people that are probably looking for you for guidance? And can you name an experience like that where you were like, wow, this guy has done his research, has thought it through, and kind of covered all the loose ends?
Well, I'm always amazed on the people who have like 4 pages of assets, like things in the house that they want, they've got a long list of things and specific people to go to. And I think, wow, and some of them might be valuable, and probably these things will mean something to these people. On the other hand, there are people or like my stuff, I don't think anyone's going to want. And I'm sure the kids will be sending. I told them at least have an auction house look at it first, because there's some valuable stuff in there. And then the rest, will probably get burned or put in a garage sale.
I've gone through houses and I'm like, and I'm walking through and it's just I have no idea what's valuable in the house. And it's like lamps and it's like porcelain stuff and it's like really just antique-y looking stuff. And I'm just thinking, what's that roadshow?
The Antiques Roadshow.
Yeah, and I'm like thinking, this is where like the guy goes, oh, this is $350,000. It was like, and it has a crazy history or something because it's by this person or something, or it's $3.
Yeah, and I do. If I bought something at auction, I'll leave the tag on the back of it. So I hope at least maybe that'll help.
That gives it a little bit of provenance, or
yeah. So at least they know. Well, maybe it, some way to research it, or like my items of, I'd say the lesser known celebrity items, like a Patrick Swayze desk. I have the.
You really do?
I do. I have his original bill of sale sitting in there in the office.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah. But that kind of stuff that if you can pick it up cheap enough at the auction, maybe when I die, someone who remembers Patrick Swayze.
You might give it a little bit of like put the paddle up with the by then. Well, you never know, right? Because things, I mean, they sell at auction for insane numbers, and you're like,
yeah, and you never know what's going to be value. Like, I love oil paintings, but when I'm looking at them, some of them sell for a few hundred, and some are 20,000, and you're looking at them, I'm not really sure what the difference is.
I'm telling you, man, I've gone through houses where it's like the houses will be like totally antique looking, but the items I just don't know what's valuable, and I'm just like, I'm thinking it has to be, right, because something has to be valuable. It just looks really cool, like cool stuff, but then I find out it's not, and then sometimes I just kind of walk by things and it's like that. It's like, okay, well, that's worth a few $1,000s. It's not a lot, but it's more than something I probably would have thrown in a dumpster if I would have, if I was just trashing out a house.
Oh yeah, or like rugs or so, and so that is if you happen to be a trustee or taking care of the estate, it's a good idea to just get some expert opinions, and they'll do it usually based on photos or something that you send them. And as I say, most of the time it's not worth a lot, but occasionally, I've been surprised, and people don't know because the other thing is things can be really valuable one decade and then just lose all that value the next. So that the collector market's a little crazy too.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking like, if publicly something gets denounced or something, then the value tanks, right? Like you mentioned, stock today.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, like that
yeah.
went up.
Maybe I know what the Bill Clinton memorabilia is going to be worth. I think
Well, it depends. What are we talking about? The dress or something?
Mhm. Yeah, that might actually have some value.
Well, I don't think that he has possession of that, but that maybe he can get it or something, and then sign it or something. Then it'll really be worth a lot if he'll ever do that. So, tell me something about like does like talking to you about whenever you're thinking about putting together a trust? What's a good idea? Like, what information should you come with?
Well, I do send out a form, but I try to keep it simple. But the main things really are getting a general idea of the type of assets that they have and a rough idea of the values, and then family information like the spouse and kids. And then after that, it's mainly, who's going to be in charge. And we say that kind of who takes care of things after your death, and then also who takes care of things if you're incapacitated, like the powers of attorney, or like you said, the guy who wasn't able to speak anymore. Who's going to be able to pay your bills and pay taxes and call up the insurance company, and some alternates for that. And then the other piece is kind of the same. If you're unable to take care of yourself, but who's going to make all the medical decisions?
Might not be the same person, right?
Yeah,
Some
because
person
sometimes
might be a little more sensitive, or
yes, yeah,
one person's all about like chop chop, like this is the way we do things. We're gonna make financial decisions, but when it comes to like emotional things and like matters of the heart, there might not be the right person.
yeah, yeah. And usually it's clients know, who's going to be kind of ready to pull the plug, maybe prematurely. So yeah, that's it's a good discussion
That's
to
funny,
have
not
and think
funny, man,
about.
but it is something to think through, right? Before we
Yeah.
start putting it down as to where you're gonna, yeah.
And I've
That's
had even some spouses will say, no, either they're going to be too emotional or they're not going to be emotional enough. And so they're okay with it. The other person, they'll say, no, I wouldn't be good at that. So they're naming a kid or a friend or someone else instead.
it's interesting to know who you're gonna choose, right? And like you're like, it's a lot to think about when because you're kind of gonna be you're planning for something where you're not gonna be there anymore. So you're essentially planning for how things are gonna play out while you're gone. And what, man, I'm trying to think of things that like might be bad ideas, like things that you think might be good ideas, but might be bad ideas. Can you think of anything off the top of your mind where people come to you and they're like, and you're like, no, that's a bad idea.
Well, one thing is if sometimes people really want some piece of property to stay in the family, but then the kids aren't always that excited about it. Or the more people you have, the more likely it is that one of them's going to want out of it at some point. So I always say if sometimes they have a dream of it being, like the lake house being there for generations for people. And I say, well, but what if, someone wants out? We got to have at least a mechanism for that, for the others maybe to buy them out, or do we set up an LLC with some buyout provisions or something to where everyone's going to get along and maybe someone's in charge and, but it's still going to take some work. Like if you've got 5 siblings sharing that lake house and dividing up time and expenses and, does someone not like the color of paint, or do they think the painter's charging too much, or just all of the things that come along with it.
Yeah.
It's so you tell them, well, and in the end, a lot of times they'll just say, well, I'll leave it up to the trustee, or maybe let the kids decide, do they want to keep it or not?
You know what? There's such a big discrepancy, right? From whenever I've dealt with like family members, whenever they're dealing with this, dividing assets, and the biggest thing and this is in general, like, right? Like, oh, this is my, like when you're selling something, they want what they paid for it and then more because they took care of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other person that's buying it is like, it's used.
Yeah.
and it's not going to last as long because it's used and you used it and it wore out. So, and there's always that division. And with family dynamics, it's like they always bring value to who cared more, right?
Yeah.
Or who put more care into the usually the taking care of the parents, and then the other people look at it more like how they financially contributed to the situation, right? So there's like, how do you kind of differentiate the value between the two, man? Because like I see people always say, but I was there all the time, and then the other one's like, yeah, but I paid the mortgage.
Yeah.
And like, which one takes more value, or is there a way of kind of differentiating that? Because that's something I see a lot of problems with.
Yeah, not a great way. I mean, ideally, those things would be kind of hashed out while the person's still alive
Yeah.
and still had some, like if someone's paying things, are they expecting to get reimbursed later?
Right. Right.
Because legally, maybe too much time has passed, or one of the other beneficiaries is going to say, well, legally, you don't have to pay them, even when the others say, no, they ought to be repaid. So ideally, that maybe there's some kind of written agreement down, or at least something to where, I agree that, well, my son's paying my mortgage right now because I can't because of my medical expenses, but he should be paid back after I die out of the proceeds first. Something like that. Or like if someone's taking care of them, it's never great for, after mom dies, then they say, well, now I need my bill paid, and here's $250,000 I think I'm owed for taking care of mom, when it was never discussed. And that one's also hard to figure out, and hard to figure out legally what their rights are. So it would sure be a lot better to agree on some kind of compensation.
Does that
ahead
normally
of time.
wind up back in court?
It can.
Yeah. So then if there is a discrepancy between the trust or the beneficiaries, it all goes to court anyways.
Yeah, if they can't work it out, then yes, it's going to wind up in court and cost a lot. And even, most of the times things get settled before a trial. But even getting the trial, there's, filing the petition and probably doing some discovery, we call it, like sending subpoenas and doing depositions and just gathering all the evidence. I mean, that just there might take you 30 to 50,000 pretty easily on each side. So,
oh my God. Okay.
So that's right. Yeah,
it's always in their best interest to try to work it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna. I mean, if you're saying 30 to 50 on each side, that's 60 to 100.
Yeah.
Off the top, right before you even see anything.
Yeah, and maybe the dispute's over 100,000. So yeah, you
like
realize, you better have a way to work it out.
Well, that's interesting. That's a big fact right there. I mean, just knowing that cost, that's the reason to have an estate plan in itself, right? And from a person planning to try to get all the kinks worked out, or think it through as to how things are going to play out. And like you mentioned, the person with the 4 pieces of paper that like has, what they want, who to call, and how to manage things, and like, what. Yeah, that's the person you want that probably will have less issues, right?
Yeah, and just to think about like what could people fight about. I mean, another one might be the one kid who got some help buying a house, but there's a few other kids who didn't get that help. Like, do they want to equalize things? And they should say that somewhere in the plan, so that it does happen. Or maybe they just want that to be a gift, and then the others aren't going to get it. But if it's clear, it's a lot less hard to fight about.
You know
later.
what I'm thinking though is like at some point, is it just when you're doing the estate plan, you're just gonna. I mean, you can't please everybody, right? That's the old saying. You can't please everybody, but you're trying to do what's best for your family and and your heirs and all. And but at some point, you're like, okay, nobody's gonna ever really be 100% happy.
That's true. And it also, there's some power in the, like, even like it said, even if, you did nothing and you die and the law says everything goes to your kids equally. Well, there's still ways to fight about that. Like, who's in charge, and did they really know Dad said he wanted me to have more? And so there's a lot of power in the written word. So if it was done and the trust says, Billy's in charge and everyone shares equally, well, then people are a lot less inclined to fight, because then they think, well, it's going to be hard to fight now because Dad was pretty clear about what he wanted.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the key, right? Is to spell it out literally as much as you can. Who is in charge? Who is supposed to manage the
Yeah.
the
So even
situation.
if you said there's going to be some people who don't like it, they're still going to be a lot less inclined to fight, and maybe they'll probably get over it a lot faster too, if it's actually written down in an estate plan.
Right on, man. Well, what are some good stories? Do you have any good stories that you've seen lately where people have been they've made mistakes, and not to make light of people's situation, but I mean, anything that you see that people have made a mistake on and went, man, if they would have just done a little bit thing different.
Well, there's one we're actually mediating very soon, that I wish they would have done an estate plan. It would have cleared up quite a bit,
Yeah.
because I know we've had several cases where paternity is an issue. So in determining, who's entitled to something, and
Yeah.
usually it's like a grandchild, because the intervening parent has died before we call the decedent, or the person whose stuff is going to be inherited.
Right.
And so I've got one case where 3 kids, but 2 of them predeceased the parents. So there's a surviving daughter, and one of the sons died pretty early. I think he was about 20 maybe.
Wow.
But
I mean, you're saying out of the 3 siblings, 2 of them passed in their
Yeah.
in their youth.
yeah, and then the issue is, there is now someone claiming to be the daughter of that kid who died at age 20.
Right.
But the birth certificate has a different name on it for the father, and mom signed that, the day after kid was born.
So do you do DNA or something?
We could, but it's not required. And I think in this case, the law presumes that if you put someone down on the birth certificate and they don't fight it, and they know about it, then after 2 years, they're presumed to be the father, and it's pretty hard to undo that.
Yeah.
But this alleged grandchild is now claiming that, well, that was somehow altered, which, they provided no proof of it. And what they did provide was some unsigned birth certificate done a month later, but not actually entered into the official state records. And so it's kind of a bizarre case, and I don't really understand how they're going to prove any of it.
Right.
And the burden's on them to prove it. It's not
But
on
this
our
is still
side.
going to court, though.
Still going to court, and it hasn't been tossed out yet. I mean, I think there's probably a good chance it could be, but it also is kind of proof that even if someone really has no chance of winning, they can still file in court, and you can still spend a lot of money trying to defend it and get rid of it. It's not like Judge Judy, where the case might get thrown out, in 30 minutes.
I'm thinking, like, that's expensive.
Yes.
For one thing, right? I mean, like, all that to straighten that out is going to be super expensive. And by the time you figure it out, what's going to be left of whatever they were arguing over?
Well, a lot less. I mean, if it went to trial, it could be, somewhere between anywhere, I don't know, 100,000 to a couple 100,000. I mean, I know our budget, I deal with some of the smaller stuff. So litigation, it usually is under a couple 100,000. I mean, if you went to a bigger firm, some of these that maybe deal in the bigger estates, it's pretty easy to have a $2 or $3 million bill.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're really arguing over, let's say, a $30 million estate, then you're
Yeah.
it's 10%, right? Or
Yeah.
you know, it's
Yeah.
not-
Then that's proportionate.
You're right.
That's all.
right.
Yeah.
If you take
where-
a $3 million bill on a $200,000 settlement, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's not going to work.
Yeah. If we're looking at a $2 million estate,
Well,
you
I
know,
think
we
as an
got to
attorney,
be.
you would look at that and be like, okay, you know, realistically, doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. And that's where you really try and explain it's in everybody's interest to settle this and not pay more, even if you think the other side's getting more than they should. Because that happens a lot in litigation. Just because someone's a jerk and won't let go, they may get more than they're entitled to. However, if they get 50,000, but that's in place of you spending another 200,000 to prevent them from getting that, well, you know, they're better off getting that. And-
You know, I guess I haven't ran into this too much recently, but I have ran into situations where people are like, you know why? Because screw them. You know?
Yeah.
Why? Because screw them. Because maybe they're in their life they're set, and the other person does need it, and they're like, you know what? Screw them. Like I just want to fight. Like, you know.
Yeah, and there's
Have
a
you ever
few
ran
of
into a
those.
situation like that, because I have ran into situations like that where it's like, why do you want to fight? Because screw them, you know. And
Oh yeah, no, I'm thinking one in particular, and the case has gone on for probably 7 years now,
oh damn,
and we're down to the last piece. But I think one guy spent quite a bit of money fighting it, and so he is. I got something that was filed in the court that basically said the only person who's going to get whatever he gets out of the trust now is his attorney, because he's run up $150,000 in fees, and his piece is not going to be any
Enough
more
that-
than
yeah.
that. So that's pretty sad. But he wanted to fight, and then there's plenty of other people in this case who wanted to fight, and one of them died in the middle of it, so we had to do the trial over again. A judge
Oh.
retired in the middle, but we're able to at least keep going on that. But over 7 years, you know, it's going to be a
man, I mean, I've sold property, and it's taken me a couple years to sell property sometimes. I mean, when it's something complicated, or like land sits around for a long time, big property of land, you know, sometimes developers don't come around for some time, but 7 years? Wow.
yeah. I don't think anyone thought it was going to take that long, but you know,
Well, I think
COVID
like,
hits in the middle of it.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
going to delay you another probably year and a half. But yeah, who would expect? But you know, people, if they're inheriting money, most likely they're going to be in their 50s or 60s themselves. So there's a good chance you're going to lose someone in the process.
Yeah, you know what? There's an old thing, and they talked about like traveling from New York to L.A. Like right now, it's like 3 hours, right? And this comedian, and he talks about like in the old days, they used to travel like it'd take like 3-4 years or something. By the time you showed up to L.A., it was like a different. Like people,
Yes.
babies were born, and like you know, so that's
Oh,
like
yeah.
only in 3-4 years. What
Exactly.
happens in 7? Like the whole dynamic changes. Like you said, the judges, all that, and now and then not to mention the fact that you've spent so much in fees. Wow, that's I don't know. That's like a fight. Why would you want to put so much of your life towards a fight like that, whenever you could probably put it into something more positive, right?
Yeah, I think everyone could have used the money, and as I said, some people would have gotten more than the others thought they deserved, but everyone would have wound up with more money.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, we've got plenty of work, so it's not like, yeah, I think people think attorneys try and churn cases and squeeze them out and or just drag them on to get more money. And I've known some people like that, but for the most part, no, because it's frustrating for us too. Like, you know,
like, all right already.
yeah,
Figure it out.
yeah, well, or just like you think, yeah, just use some common sense, but also you just feel for them, because I know if I were in their shoes, I would think at some point I'd wake up and think, wow, I wish I wouldn't have spent all that money.
But then there's always the screw 'em. Why
Yeah.
screw 'em? Like it's okay. I don't need the money. I'll just. They get more satisfaction. Like if they had money to spend, they would spend that money causing agony for the other person, anyways.
Yeah, and I think, you
They
know,
look
the
at it
guy
as money
who,
well spent.
you know, spent his inheritance on the attorneys, he's probably he probably got some satisfaction out of
Yeah,
it.
that was his whole plan.
But
So,
he's probably living in a van now. But
right?
yeah,
But he's sitting there with that happiness that he made his.
but he got him. Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Well, that's part of the human condition, right? I mean, and then settling. Well, I think that's what it's all about with estate planning, right? You want to try to avoid all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think the sooner you do it, and the sooner you can work out all these details, and then adjust it as your life goes on.
Yeah.
So how do people get a hold of you? Like, what's the easiest way to contact you?
Probably just, on the web, it's my name. I'm at ChristopherBJohnson.com, and there's a contact form on the website, or go ahead and call our office. We're at 888-503-7615, and that, we can set up a time to talk, and we don't charge for the initial consultation, and then as much as we can do on a flat fee basis, we try for that, so people aren't worried about getting one of those giant bills.
Yeah. So I your name, Christopher B. Johnson. It's like the most common, two of the most common names I probably know, right? So
well, I look once in a while.
Then...
Yeah, they're well, I used to also be Simi Valley's #1 realtor and Tennessee Titans running back. But
how'd you get that one? That sounds like a backstory on the Tennessee Titans one.
Oh no, it's just someone with the same name. But
gotcha.
But there's
okay.
There's a few Christopher B. Johnsons out there.
I imagine it's common. That's what I think I was getting at.
Yeah.
But also your website, but the B in the middle, that's what.
Yeah, yeah, because then there's even more Christopher Johnsons out there, including I think some attorneys with bar records, that aren't good. So I'm the one. Yeah, make sure you get the right one. But yeah, with the B for Bernard in the middle. But yeah, that's in the website. I got it, I don't know, 15 years ago, and now I realize it's kind of long. And when someone's typing out the email,
or practicing law?
I've been since. I got admitted in December of '94.
All right.
So it's almost 30 years now. Next month.
Wow. So you've seen your fair share of these things play out.
Yeah. It's starting to feel kind of old now. Like I'm the old guy at the courthouse now. But
well, you probably have the most experience, man. You're looking at them and they're coming in, and you're like, all right, I see that. Yeah. Okay. I see how I know that's gonna work out. You probably get a lot of that now, right?
Oh yeah, I'm a lot more calm now.
A lot more difficult to frazzle you with the
less sweating in front of the judges now.
Well, I don't know. I guess I'm not mad that I don't spend more time in a courthouse, right? But like
no, it's
never...
pretty boring most of the time, unless it's your case. Then you're really stressed.
Yeah, I don't want to be in court. I try to avoid court at all costs if I can. There's always discussions with, or discrepancies with real estate, but I'd rather figure out ways of settling things out than going that route, just to do things. Yeah.
And there's usually a lot of ways to avoid, like the best case is even if a court case has been filed, normally if you can agree and settle and come to an agreement and file that, then the court case gets dropped. And so yeah, before you spend too much money, or you got to go in front of the judge or testify or get all that stress, it's just a lot nicer to work it out and have it be done with. And so rather than, I think sometimes people think maybe it's going to be over pretty quick, and it's not. It's going to be at least a couple of years, if you're fighting in court before you'd ever make it to trial.
So what do you think are any common misconceptions with an estate plan? Like people expect something from it, or that doesn't.
Probably the biggest, and I got asked about it today, is they think the trust will also provide some liability protection. Like, well, I heard online that if I put all my assets in a trust, then if I get sued, they can't get them. And
like asset protection. Right?
Yeah. There are ways to protect your assets, and you can even in some states put your own assets into a trust to some extent, but it's kind of complicated and expensive. But the short answer is in California, you can't be the beneficiary of your own trust and have that be protected against people trying to sue you.
And okay, so then there's also the revocable versus irrevocable, right?
Yeah.
So what are the main differences in those two?
So the main revocable means you can revoke it, meaning get rid of it altogether, or more likely change it over time with amendments. And that's the kind most people have,
Right.
and the kind we recommend most often, because that's the one that is most useful for avoiding probate and keeping the costs down after someone passes away. And that's the one we'd recommend most of the time. It becomes irrevocable at death, so the trustee then can't step in and change what your wishes were.
So how does that? Okay, so that's interesting what you just mentioned. If like let's say it's a husband and wife and one passes, what can the other one go back and change it, or
Depends on the trust. Sometimes they can. Sometimes, and probably the most common one is that the surviving spouse can make whatever changes they want to make, and then at their death, then becomes irrevocable.
okay,
But there's other kinds where people are worried about some bad person moving in on the surviving spouse
Right.
and pressuring them to change it. And so another common one that we do is called an A-B trust, where part becomes irrevocable. Like the first spouse to die, say it's the husband, his share of the assets, like the half the community property and any separate property he has, goes into an irrevocable trust.
yeah, okay.
So the wife, surviving spouse, they can still live in the house, get the income from what's in the husband's share of the trust, but they can't change the beneficiaries. And so that protects the kids or whoever the beneficiaries are. And so that surviving spouse can still kind of use it like they would have if you didn't have that irrevocable trust. But their limit is they can't just decide, well, I don't like this kid anymore, or
Yeah,
I don't like your side of the family, which happens a lot. So if you've got different sets of beneficiaries, then that's especially where I recommend the trust. Or like a second marriage where there's two sets of kids, there's a good chance that the surviving spouse is not going to like the other one's kid, or they just think they're not visiting enough, or they don't deserve it as much as my needed kids. So that kind of irrevocable trust we use a lot
so
because
that's an AB trust.
yeah,
So that basically at death of one of the spouses triggers either the A or the B to become irrevocable.
yeah.
So then the irrevocable one, what are the pros and cons of that trust?
So that we probably don't use much except if there's an estate tax issue. And so
Okay.
that's one where you want to, you're making a trust, and once you've signed it, you can't change the terms of it. And so normally it's like setting up a trust for your kids, maybe, and moving assets into there, or grandkids, or some other, maybe a charitable trust or something. But most of the time when we use that, it's to move assets out and avoid the estate tax. And for people now, that really only affects people if what they have net value is more than about 14 million.
Okay, so
Most of us
yeah.
don't have to worry about it. But for those who do, then maybe we do a trust where they will put a life insurance policy in that irrevocable trust, or put an asset in there that, we're talking with a client about before they sell an apartment building and pay a lot of taxes on it, they'll put it in a trust that will pay them an income for the rest of their life, and then the rest goes to the charity. And they're going to wind up paying a lot less taxes over time with that kind of trust.
So it's more for tax strategy purposes than
Yeah.
anything. But it also makes it protected, right? Because people can't come after you. Or
Yeah.
They can't disband it.
Yeah, once it's in trust, and you're not the person creating it is not also the beneficiary. So like, say you set up the trust for your kids, or after you die even, it's held in trust for your kids. They're protected. And so while the money's in trust, if they have creditors, the creditors only have very limited access to get at what's in the trust.
So it's kind of like protects it, like the OJ money. Or what didn't he still
Yeah.
have like some Heisman Trophy money?
Well,
or
what
something?
he had, one good tool for asset protection, I tell people, is have a 401k plan, because his main asset was that pension, and
The
that,
Heisman Trophy, right?
yeah, that the
Do they give you one for? I think if you get the Heisman Trophy, there's some kind of a financial aspect to it. That's what I understood.
yeah, and so anything like like a 401k or something that's covered by federal law,
Yeah.
which includes 401ks, pensions, yeah, some other 403bs, or things like that, that creditors cannot get at. And so that was the one thing that OJ had that nobody could get.
He still had a paycheck till his final
Yeah,
days, right?
yeah.
And they took everything, took his football and everything, dude.
Exactly. They take that, and then I think he moved to Florida, which has some kind of more generous homestead law than California does. So he could keep a house, although I guess now that got divided up among, the his creditors. And
Oh, did they wind up getting to it even at the end?
yeah, I don't know how much was left, but
No, right? I mean, at the end of the day, literally at the end of the day, or the last day,
yeah,
you want to try to protect your assets as much as you can, but he had a lot of exposure, right?
yeah.
And
So I do say, if you do have those kids or beneficiaries who just aren't good with money, even if they're much older, and so we've done that. Most of the time it's just easiest, and most of the time people just want to give it with no strings attached,
Right.
if the kids are old enough. But if a kid is never going to get it right, or they're worried about him living on the street, well, then putting it in the trust might be a good thing, because then they're always going to have money, and you can give them an income for life, or pay for the apartment, or have a house, or whatever trouble they get into, they can lose whatever they have, but they can't lose the trust. So
well, I mean, it's like a pension plan for that for them, right? I mean, some people. I mean, I think everybody always says a trust fund baby or trust fund kid, but like if you grow up and you have, even a couple $1,000s a month in today's world,
yeah,
that would cover your, I don't know, depending on where you live, right? Some places
yeah.
you
Well, I
can
did
buy a
one.
house, but some places you can.
Yeah,
can't even get enough
recently,
room.
where he's had problems with substance abuse, and maybe coming out of it now, but even if he doesn't, I mean, that trust is going to provide him with, I think, about $4,000 a month, which
Yeah.
more than meets his needs, and that keeps him from selling it all, or gambling, or blowing it in a weekend or two, and he'll always be taken care of, which his mother is really worried about him, and I think this way she can be assured that he's never going to be out on the street,
Yeah.
no matter what happens.
Well, that's a big safeguard, right? So it's like a way of putting a safeguard in your income. So it's a tool. It's a tool. I mean, it takes some proper structuring and a need for it, right? In certain situations.
Yeah, and it could be a painful conversation to go through that and why you need it, but if it's better than, like, if it was just going to him outright, here's your third of the estate. Well, he gets $1 million. He may not have that in a couple of years, and what's he going to do for the next 20 years?
I remember a friend that got, and I don't know how much of this is completely accurate, but in high school he got shot with a BB gun or something, and it took out an eye.
Mm.
And then he wound up getting a settlement and bought some badass cars right back then. I won't tell you what kind, because I don't want to put him on blast, but like, I mean, a few years later, man, he just didn't have anything, and it was, and when you're young, it's a lot of money, but if you can blow through it really fast.
Oh yeah,
Right.
people don't realize how fast you can go through it, and how much stuff, like, if you buy a big house, how much does it cost to maintain that big house? And that money could be gone pretty quick. And when's the next batch coming? It may never come.
Yeah, I mean, I guess structuring all this stuff is really about being proactive with what you got and how you want to disperse it, and once you're gone, and and getting ahead of it, man. So I encourage people to sit down with you. I mean, I have, and we've made some planning, right, over the years, and I appreciate you, man.
Oh, sure. And we try to make it as painless as possible.
Yeah.
And most people say that.
Well,
So,
it's tough because you have to coordinate things with family members, and and I'm fortunate. My family's really cooperative with me. We get along well. But I do have really close friends that don't have a really good connection with their family members, and it's hard to watch, man. It's just really hard to watch because sometimes I don't disagree with everybody, and then I might even agree with like not my friend, but their siblings on matters, but what can I do? At the end of the day, watching them kind of fight over things is really difficult. So anything I can do to kind of ease that and help them find some peace in their world, man, it's just something I would always want to give people.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
well,
And I feel like that's what you do, man,
Yeah, well, I tell people, you still want all the beneficiaries talking with each other at the end of this thing.
Yeah. And I think the parents, I mean, that one instance where, the gentleman wasn't able to speak anymore. And then he had a lot of assets. He had a lot of cash assets at the end of the day that he was distributing to his family members. But I think it really helped because that would have been just a mess, if them trying to figure it out on their own after that, it just would have been a mess, man. I feel like it really did help them sort through what, they had the instructions, they were laid out. And, you're never going to solve the problem 100% because there's always hey, my mom loved you more than me, or she always favored you or something like that. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
There's always that kind of
Yeah, that
resentment.
never gets solved. They take that to the grave. But
Yeah, it's true, but there always is a little bit of sibling rivalry and some kind of hard feelings over stuff. But the acid stuff, man, if you can just solve that, then at least there's some peace in that, and you can resolve that before they're fighting over it.
oh,
as much
yeah.
as you can.
Yeah, if you plan ahead, it's just going to go a whole lot better than if
Yeah.
you didn't.
All right, man. Anything else that you wanted to discuss? I mean, I know you got a lot of. I'm sure you have. I don't know how many of these stories you can't discuss. You know what I mean?
Well, I think the only thing I'll say, there is a change coming up next year that I don't think a lot of people have heard about. And in the end, it might just be a whole lot of nothing. But because in the end, I think the trust is still better. But starting April 1st, 2025, for a primary residence that is valued less than $750,000 at date of death, the full probate will not be required to get it out to whoever the heirs or the beneficiaries are. So it's good in a way that it'll help if someone's not done any planning.
Yeah.
But the cost involved, even with the procedure in that, is still going to be more than a trust, and it still might take a bit longer than a trust, and it kind of requires all the parties to get along. And so I just wanted to put that out there because maybe people might be hearing, well, I don't really need a trust anymore. All I have is my house. Well,
$750,000. That's a pretty low threshold if you take California pricing into consideration.
yeah,
Because knowing home prices let's just say I live in the Santa Clarita Valley, where the median price is like $830, and in the San Fernando Valley it's slightly higher, the neighboring valley. This is median price, and you're already over it. So
Yeah.
and that's required. I mean, if a condo maybe, right?
yeah. There's some things where it'll be good news probably for people who haven't planned or.
Is this only California?
Yeah, just California.
So there are areas where that'll help, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
It's,
just not those.
Yeah, if you're really remote or
Yeah,
maybe Joshua Tree,
Yep,
some.
you're gonna get unless
But yeah, it's still, and even then though, I mean that it's a probate court process, so the fees involved might be still like $7,500 versus a few thousand after death with the trust. So it still makes sense to plan.
right. Yeah. I'm thinking like people will not plan. I mean, I guess if you plan, you probably can. If you're a planner, you tend to have more stuff because you plan.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
one habit. So
Yeah,
that
they're
people
kind of the savers anyway.
right,
Yeah.
right. So like if people don't plan, then they're not going to plan, and then they probably don't need it. And that's probably why this rule was enacted to kind of cover that demographic, right?
I think so. Because, yeah, most of the probates we do where there's no will, it is just a house and maybe some cars, but that's about it. And so I think that'll cover a lot of people, and it will make things a little bit easier on them and lessen the pain and the fees and all. But it's still not the best solution.
No, I would always recommend to do an estate planning, an estate plan, especially when you have more assets, right? If you have one house that's already over, and especially if you want to you want to protect it and make it go to the right place. So you know what? Okay, so I know that we were kind of like we were touching on this, but how does that work? What would be the best way that somebody would structure something so like the surviving spouse remarries and doesn't cut somebody out? That's the AB thing?
Yeah.
Okay. That was one thing that I had pending in my mind, and I had written a note on it because I knew we were going to meet today. All right, that was my big question, man.
Oh, yeah.
That I had, and I think we covered it earlier. Was there anything else that you thought was you wanted to discuss, or anything pending, or anything that's going to change, or that one other than that rule that you just mentioned?
No, I think that's it. I'll have to give you an update on what happens with this birth certificate case.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, not well.
It's cool if you're not one of the people involved. Yeah.
You know what? I mean, stories are like juicy, right? To some extent, like, and that's kind of what we want to talk about. But at the same time, you realize it's at the discrepancy of people. So like, then you're like, oh, okay, maybe I just don't want to really like bring it up. But like, it also, some people are dealing with that stuff, you know, and they want to, some people it's entertainment. Other people it's you know, food for thought, you know?
Yeah, well, and I'm actually kind of surprised, and it's not every day, but at least once a year, I get the question of, well, does this person are they really entitled to get this? Or maybe their dad wasn't really the same as my dad, or, where they're trying to cut someone out or maybe bring someone in. And the law is, I know it's kind of complex and arcane. And so again, ideally, you would have done a plan before death. But if there wasn't a plan, well, there's a lot of ways to fight over it. And I just say, too, if there's some doubt about paternity, well, try and settle that before death. Maybe you all do the ancestry thing together, because I didn't mention it, but the law really doesn't, in the probate code at least, it does not force a DNA test. And that actually was in one of our cases. It was actually the Charles Manson estate.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know why anyone would really want a piece of it, but there were some people fighting over it, and whether a DNA test would be required to prove someone was related was one of the issues. It went up on appeal. The appellate court said the judge cannot force someone to take a DNA test.
Did Charlie there? Did he have an estate to distribute? I mean, he was in jail most of his life.
He
right?
did. I mean, essentially artworks and maybe the rights to whatever intellectual property might be there.
Yeah, there'll be stories and everything.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have if you have a name that's memorable, like his name, right? You hear his name and you're like, I know who that is, right? So.
Yeah. Maybe people thought, well, maybe there's something here. I just, honestly, I thought, well, I'm kind of glad we're out of it, because now the artwork doesn't have to wind up in my office. So
it's kind of like I saw recently Bert Kreischer. He he has this thing where people were giving him like Nazi memorabilia, and like somehow he wound up being the I don't know what do you call that, not the collector, but the person that what do they call the people that like maintain, that keep things.
Curator, maybe.
Curator, there you
Yeah.
go. The curator of Nazi like Hitler memorabilia, right? So like it's like like he's like, dude, how the hell did I wind up being this guy that has to take care of this? And like you wound up being having to deal with that estate, the Manson estate. Wow, okay, that's a tough one. I don't know that I wanted to compare that to Hitler, but
Kind of the same,
Well,
yeah.
they're
Like
both, like-
stuff you might not want in your own house.
yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it's like okay, well, sometimes you take things from jobs, right? Like, and you can sometimes people won't pay you, so they'll give you things in lieu of payment, right? Like settle out. Somebody gave me a gun holster one time. It didn't have a gun in it, but it gave me a holster and it was pretty cool. It was like one of those, and I used it for like Halloween costumes, but I never got like a Charles Manson. All right, man. So I think we're gonna cut it off here.
All
You
right.
good?
I am.
I thank you for coming out, Chris. I really appreciate you.
Yeah,
And,
well, thanks for the interview. That was fun.
That was fun, man. So we'll have to do it again soon, and maybe you can update us on that law change and anything else, any new stories, man.
That sounds good.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for tuning into the Opposites Unite podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to leave a comment for a chance to get a shout out in our next video. See you next time.